Yesterday, President Buhari signed what he calls a budget of continuity. Of course, he's the man who will still be sitting down in the #1 position, midwifing the 2019 budget. This is a transition on our political calendar, but it's a continuity. So how do you transit while you continue the same administration where revenue had been the administration's Achilles heel since it got into office in 2015. So we're trying to use the budget to engineer revenue. But it is important to alert everyone that some of Nigeria's international funding windows may be closing very soon. So the country needs new sources of money. And that's putting it as simply, as bare as it could get. But let's get a bit of a sense and insight into where we go from here as President Buhari gets his 4x4 term from tomorrow, technically, on the calendar. Olugbenro, who is a partner and West Africa tax leader at Deloitte Nigeria, live here in our global headquarters studios. Thank you very much for coming.
Good morning. Thank you.
Very good time. So how do we transit in the political economy while we continue the same administration? On paper, it looks like, well, it has to be easy because the same administration, the same CEO, but most likely a different cabinet. We're not sure yet.
Well, I don't think it's going to be that easy. And the president made it abundantly clear that the other phase is not going to be an easy walkover.
He said so. He said so at the cabinet meeting when he won the election. He says it's going to be a tough time. The central bank chief has said so as well. And you are saying so.
That's correct, so because there are big issues on the table that are not yet fully resolved. And you alluded to that earlier when you were talking about the quantum of the revenue that is available, to meet the huge expectation of the populace. Let's park aside the fact that he's grudgingly signed a budget, as it were, maybe second time or third time in a row that's going to be doing that. So the budget's been signed, it's going to be sent back for rework. But when everything is done and dusted, we need to raise the revenue to be able to implement, each and one of those initiatives that has been listed, whether it's revenue, recurrent expenditure, whether it's debt servicing, or even the much touted capital plan that's been a major challenge for the country. So there are bigger issues on the table.
If you're a CEO and you grudgingly sign the budget for the company, the first year, the second year, and the third year, how do we resolve this problem? Yomi, do you have any idea? Because the president himself says yesterday, this budget, this document is not implementable, but I've got to sign it. Sign it under duress. We went through this last year. Here we are again.
I think it's a multifaceted issue. So there are regulatory issues or legal issues to be dealt with. I think the roles of both the executive and the legislature can be better clarified so that we know who is responsible for what. But that's just part of our issue, So we have delays in signing, of appropriation bills. Sometimes we've had to wait for 7 months, sometimes 5 months, and then we have revenue shortage, which for me is by far the biggest of our challenge. Because if you look at the total budget, we're talking of 8.92 trillion or thereabout. The entirety of the revenue from oil, from non-oil, from independent revenue sources will practically only be barely sufficient to defray recurrent expenditure obligation and debt servicing. So we practically have to borrow to do debt servicing. That's on the assumption that we meet all of our revenue projections. We've never done in all our recent history. So we end up, meeting our recurrent expenditure 100%. We meet our debt obligation almost 100%. And we didn't have enough revenue. So you can do the math. So it means perhaps part of the borrowing, it's also going to defray some of this recurrent obligation. So we have capital spending that we're never able to meet. So that's a challenge. And just to compound that a little for you, last year, I think the total capital spending was about 2.8 trillion or thereabout. As at the third quarter of last year, we've only been able to do about 820 billion. So let's assume that we're probably able to do an extra 500 billion by the time the budget window is over for 2018. We'll have raised it to potentially 1.3 trillion. That's still like half of what we plan to spend. And that's talking only spending and releases. It doesn't actually literally mean that you will see tangible evidence on the ground that you've done 1.2 or 1.3 trillion. Because sometimes it takes 2, 3 years for many of these capital plans to become a real tangible thing on the ground.
President Buhari is, I think, one president we haven't had in recent times who has a very large heart. He wants past pensions paid. He wants everybody to be happy. He is the big man. Aside the central bank that bail out banks, this is the first time a sitting president is bailing out about 2 dozens, more than 2 dozens state governments with trillions, billions of dollars. So he needs and he wants to do critical social sector, health, education, and other things. So where would he find the money? And what critical things do you think, what were you likely to hear from him tomorrow in his inauguration speech that will show that, yes, both the federal, the executive, the legislature are ready to be part of this tight rope that we're walking for the next 4 years?
Well, I think the much the president will do tomorrow will probably be to solicit for the cooperation and support of all the organs and agencies of government.
What hard decisions do you think he would have to take?
That decision won't be tomorrow. But the decision that will need to be taken will be how to focus on growing our revenue sources. And a number of initiatives are already on the table being implemented by the Ministry of Finance and some of the initiatives that the government embarked upon in the first half or in this administration that is just coming to an end today. So by the time we have the new administration coming tomorrow, my expectation is that there will be a different sense of urgency at implementing many of those reforms. We've never been short of thinking and ideas and suggestions. So what are we doing to deal with the very critical shortage that we're experiencing in our revenue sources? How do we grow non-oil tax revenue in a way that we won't damage the economy? So how do we balance the fact that we need to generate revenue from the economy that is already very depressed under very serious challenge?
Do you have any idea where we can find money in this economy?
We can find money in this economy, but it won't be a short-term solution. I think the majority of our challenge over the past few years is that we're looking for quick fixes. And that's why we go on an aggressive chase of revenue drive, looking at the business community to do a little more than they are doing. We introduced different kind of schemes. We introduced tax amnesty. The revenue authorities became very aggressive with revenue drive and enforcement. That it's only short-term fixes. We have fundamental issue with growing the base. The amount of tax you're able to generate is just a fraction of the economic prosperity of that economy. So we need to make this economy to be a lot more buoyant, to be a lot more productive. We need to empower a lot more of our productive assets to be yielding far more. And that will require that we take some short-term pains, encourage investment, drive investment to critical sector, encourage and energize, the MSME sector, and let the economy be a lot more buoyant. In the short term, there may appear to be a little bit of shortages in some of the revenue, but we're going to end up building a more sustainable way of raking in revenue in trillions of naira over the next couple of years.
Where would you want to see this squeezing more water out of the rock, as it were, in terms of belt tightening, if I want to use the street parlance here? In terms of fiscal prudence, let's start with that. On the side of the government, then we'll talk about the side of the people.
Well,
so where would you want to see more in terms of fiscal prudence?
If we look at the side of the government, I think it's almost...
And across all levels this time.
Across all levels.
Federal, states, local...
Federal, states,
yes.
executives, MDAs, the legislature and all of that. I think if you look at the size of the budget and the quantum of recurrent expenditure, it's just unsustainable. It's just too much. We need to find a way of creating a lot more efficiency and drive a lot more to capital spending. Until we're able to do that, we're not going to be able to achieve more. We have challenges raising more revenue, but we're filtering it away in recurrent spending and salary and all sorts of perks and allowances. We can do a lot more fundamental surgical, operation in our recurrent spending. And we can do that on the side of the government. We also need to be a lot more accountable and transparent in the way we report the revenue so that the little we're making, we're able to actually utilize it productively. That's for me would be on the side of the government in terms of belt tightening. But if we also look at the economy as a whole, I think we can generate far more than we're doing, even in terms of what the economy is yielding, at the moment. The HNI, the high net worth individuals, I think a lot more can be done in that respect, so that those who earn more can pay fair share of that income and economic prosperity in taxes to the government.
I hope you're not talking about me, because I'm not among those high net worth individuals, as you put it. So we've tried to do luxury tax. We've tried to do a bit of this, whatever. But we haven't really been aggressive on that. I haven't seen that on the street. Even the last administration talked about it. But we haven't really seen that in action. Or you think it's in action, but it's coming in trickles, or folks are trying to...
My challenges with some of the initiatives we've had over the past few years is that they're just short-term quick fixes. We have some fundamental issue that we need to do with, for example, the law and the regulatory framework. So I think the analogy I could use is a man who's got, a very aged and old, antiquated vehicle, running on, maybe a seven-lane highway. Now, this vehicle itself is outdated. But more fundamentally, the car is not even maintained, it's not even serviced regularly. That's the state of the law that we're using to tax and extract revenue from this digital economy that we're in. We're running tax administration with 1960s legislation, 1970 legislations, and we're not even passing amendments. Just look at the last 4 years, how many tax bills went through the National Assemblies and got passed in an administration when revenue challenge had become very fundamental and very, and very huge in that particular way. So I think we need to focus on the big thing. We need to go back to do the right thing. And President Buhari must understand that the second term is always for legacy building. This is the time that the tax-paying community are looking up to the president to say, give us new set of law, create new enabling environment, build institutions, and do fundamental reforms that will outlast, this 4-year administration. And we need to do that as quickly as we can. We have 4 years, but in our political experience, we know that the only thing you can do within the first 2 years is perhaps all that you will be able to achieve in the whole of the 4 years. By the time you get to the 3rd year, election cycle is over, election season is over, and by the time you get to the 4th year, you're handing over to another administration. So we need to hit the ground running with some sense of urgency. Let's look at the regulatory framework. How do we tax a new digital economy? How do we introduce legislations that will focus on e-commerce? How do we empower the MSME sector? How do we make the business environment a lot more business friendly? How do we build institutions with the revenue generating authorities and not the ad hoc approach of using agents and consultants to be able to support? That's just very short term. We need to build institutions that will last longer.
Olugbenro, thank you so much. I know the president's script writers are listening to this conversation, and they're working on the president's script for tomorrow. By this time tomorrow, we would have heard from Mr. President.
Yeah, I'm sure the president will be raising his right hand by this time tomorrow.
Raising his right hand. Thank you so much, everyone. It's good to see you. Listen to the president. We're going to come back when his second term gets underway. Olugbenro, a partner and West Africa tax lead at Deloitte, Nigeria.